Look at this. Look at how pretty those colors are. Hey there, flower stabbers! Welcome back to Sola Flower University. Today, we're going to be going over 4 ways that you can color your flowers. First, we'll go over how to spray paint them. Next, we'll go over how to dip dye. Next, we'll do how to airbrush them. And then finally, we'll do how to paint them. Also, don't forget to stay tuned for some extra tips at the end. Each of these have their different uses, so let's jump right into it. Alright, so before we begin, make sure that you've done the essentials, which means softening your flowers and also making sure that your flowers have been stabbed appropriately, which involves wire and floral tape on your flowers. If you're not sure how to do that, I've got links in the description box down below where I will go over how to do that. Now, to spray paint, it's very simple. You just take your spray can, shake it up, and you spray. Okay, just like that. Make sure you do this in a well-ventilated area, obviously, and make sure that you have your flower softened. Without your flower softened, it is going to become very crunchy. The softener helps make it so that way it doesn't break as much, and the spray paint actually makes it very crunchy. For the second step, we are going to be doing some dip dyeing. So what you're going to need is a bowl of water, and you're going to need some paint, and you're going to need flowers that have been properly prepared. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to actually take our paint and put it in the water. About that much. And you can see here, it's about that much. And then we are going to mix it up. So before we begin dyeing, I want you to be aware that the type of paint you want to use is acrylic paint. I'm using acrylic paint, craft paint that you can get from like Walmart or Michael's or Hobby Lobby or any of your local craft stores. And you want to make sure that you're using distilled water or water that's been through a filter. And then you are ready to go. All right. So after you put the paint in, you want to do a quick test dip. I am going to just make sure that everything is all mixed together really well before I do a test dip, because any paint that is lingering on the bottom will show through. And then when you dip, make sure that you get the flower fully submerged. Dip it a couple of times, shake off the extra, and then put it in whatever you're going to use to dry it. Today I'm going to use little egg cartons, and I'm just going to go ahead and put it in like that. And then you're going to want to let it dry for a couple hours. What we're doing next is we're going to be doing our airbrush. So I've already put 1.5 teaspoons of water in here, and then I'm going to put 1/2 teaspoon of paint. When you are doing air spraying, you want to make sure that your paint is thin enough, and you also want to make sure you read the directions on your airbrush for how much to thin your paint. It's going to depend a lot on your needle size, and so just keep that in mind as you are doing this. Now I am going to take a brush here and call that good. And I'm going to mix this up. So the proportions I'm doing today are 3-to-1 thinner, so 3 parts thinner, 1 part paint, and I have a 3.5 millimeter needle point. Your air gun will have its own needle point and its own specifications for how much to thin your paint, so make sure you read directions on how much to thin your paint. I'm also going to be using a airbrush flow improver today. The airbrush flow improver just helps keep the paint from drying out on the tip of the airbrush and just kind of helps things flow. I just found this on Amazon, and you just have to add a couple of drops. So like for this one, I'm just gonna add like 2 drops. So really not needing a bunch. Mix it up again. Okay. So then what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a second jar and a strainer, a paint strainer, and I'm gonna stick it in that jar and I'm gonna pour the paint through. You wanna make sure that there's no particles in your paint or nothing that's gonna get stuck in the airbrush. It's really, really important to make sure that there is no particles that will clog up your airbrush. So once I've got that done, I'm gonna put that aside. Now I'm going to fill up my airbrush tank with paint. You can see 2 teaspoons fills this up just fine. I'm gonna put it in here. Make sure the water that you're using for this is either distilled or filtered water. You don't want any particles in your water to clog up you don't want hard water deposits to clog up your airbrush. I'm gonna take that off. Turn this on. Turn on my airbrush. Okay, now we're gonna see how it's working. All right, we're working. So I'm gonna go ahead and start airbrushing my flower. All right, so now that I've finished, you can see that the effect of the airbrush is a little bit different than a dip dye. Just for comparison sake, this was a dip dye. You can see that this is more of a solid color. The airbrush, you get a little bit more texture, especially depending on how you paint. The nice thing with an airbrush is you can also go in after you've already dip dyed and add some accents to a dip dye just to get a little bit of color. So like say if you wanted to just add little hints of something, you can take one that's already dip dyed and just add just like little hints of other color. So yeah, you can go in with a second color and dip dye it a little bit differently and add just a little bit of some fun accents. Let's see if you can see that better. Yeah, and so you can see I just added a little bit of a blue accent to this purple flower, just something fun. Obviously, you're gonna need to experiment a lot with that and figure out what works and how to get the colors that you want. But the airbrush is really nice because you have a lot of control of where the color lands on the flower. And you also have a lot of control over how much comes on the flower. Something that you're gonna have to practice a lot with the airbrush is airbrush control and how much and how little. Most airbrushes, the way they work is just a little bit and it increases the further back you go. So that is how you do an airbrush. All right, so the final one that we're going to be doing is we're going to be painting our flowers. Now, when you're painting, you don't necessarily have to stem your flower first. You can stem your flower first. Today, I'm going to work with a flower that has not been stemmed first. I did soften it first. With painting, it's a little bit more flexible. You can actually soften it after you paint as well. It just kind of depends on what your preference is there. All right, there we go. So, so we're going to go ahead and I'm going to create a color. So I'm going to do a little bit of green, a little bit of blue, and I'm going to mix it together. So I kind of want a greenish bluish color today. kind of a dark turquoise. There we go. Put my paints back. And then I'm also going to grab a little bit of water to work with here too, just in case I need it. So when you're painting, you can definitely get a little bit more of a solid color on there, and you've got a ton of control over where the color goes. You can start with just straight on painting the flower. The thicker the paint is on the flower, the more crunchy the flower is going to be afterwards. So if you're going to do really thick paint, I would definitely suggest softening first. If you're planning on just doing just a soft layer of paint, then you can soften afterwards. If you're going to soften afterwards, what I would suggest is put your softening agent in a spray bottle and then just spray the flowers afterwards. Doing it the same way that we talked about in the softening video, but just instead of dipping the flower in it, you can spray it on. You could also dip the flower in the softening agent again, you just would risk losing some color with that, and so it would be better to spray it on. So I'm going to go ahead and do some basic painting here just to show you what it would look like. After making sure that you've got all the areas covered, I've got the color on just the inside right now. It wasn't a perfect job, and I've got a little bit of color on the outside layer, but that's going to be okay. I'll show you why here in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more blue to my paint to create kind of a two-tone effect going on here. And I'm going to go ahead and paint the layers in the back. Okay, so you can see here, I've got a two-tone effect going on here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a little bit of this color and put it around the top edges of the inner, just that way to create a little bit more color consistency. So I'm going to pour a little bit of water into the paint to make it a little bit more fluid and runny. And what this is going to do is create a more organic flow of the paint on the top. And what I'm going to do is just take the paintbrush and just kind of tap, 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 tap. Just tap along the top of it to let the paint just kind of flow down into there. All right, now that you have gotten it all painted like that, and I hope you can see that, then you will want to let it dry overnight. All right, so now that you have seen everything and how it all works, I wanted to give you a couple of extra tips. When you are using paint, make sure that you use acrylic paint. Acrylic craft paint works really well. The stuff that you can find at Walmart or Hobby Lobby or Michael's, or I think you can even find it at Joann's. Most craft stores will have this kind of paint. One thing that you want to keep in mind is what you want the final product to look like. Every kind is going to give you a little bit of a different effect. Just to kind of review, this is our airbrushed one. This is our dip dye with a little bit of airbrush. This is our painted. And then this is our spray painted. What I would suggest is if you are doing spray paint is to make sure that you are only using that for colors that you can't really get any other way. Sparkly colors or metallic colors are really hard to get in dip dyeing or airbrushing, and so it would be better to spray paint those. As far as if you're wanting to just have one solid color on all your flowers and you want to kick through them really fast, dip dyeing is really fast and will get you a bunch of flowers colored really quickly. Airbrushing is really nice for getting a nice soft look on your flower. You can kind of see some white tips showing through. It's really great for a soft look. It's also great for adding accent colors to flowers that have already been dip dyed or painted. Painting flowers is definitely the one that takes the longest time, and that's because you have to go in and meticulously use your paintbrush and make sure you get every edge. With dip dyeing, all you have to do is take your flower and dip it in and then pull it out, and all the edges are already covered in paint. When you paint it by hand, you have to go in with a paintbrush and meticulously get every little edge, and so it takes a long time, but you can also get some really cool effects with painting. One of the nice things about doing painting, you could go in after you've already dip dyed it or after you've already airbrushed it and add in like little white dots or little effects to it to add a little bit of character or to make the flower come alive even more. And so really, ultimately, you might find to get the best effect, you will be using a combination of these different types to really get the effect that you want on your flower. That is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button to join my floral empire. Mwah! Ha 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 ha! Have a great day, and remember, stay creative.